18-year-old Nolan Xavier Wells disappeared during a 4th of July trip to Mississippi. Days later, he was found dead, but his family never believed the official explanation. Now they say a new independent autopsy has uncovered details that change everything. Let me break it down. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, a football player out of Ocean Springs, Mississippi, who'd gone on to play at Southwest Mississippi Community College. On July 3rd, the night before everything changed, he cooked his parents dinner, baked salmon after his mom had a busy day at work. That's the kind of kid people describe when they talk about Nolan. He stayed at a friend's house that night, and the next morning the plan was simple. A 4th of July boat trip to Horn Island with a group of friends. Horn Island isn't like the beaches most people picture. It's a popular, undeveloped island just south of Ocean Springs, Mississippi, accessible only by private boat, with no facilities, drinking water, or staff. Miles of open water separated from the mainland. No cell towers, no lifeguards, just sand, current, and whoever showed up that day. Nolan was last seen around 3 p.m., wearing blue swim trunks and sunglasses. According to one account that circulated from the search effort, he wanted to stay on the island to talk with a girl. His friends packed up and headed back to the mainland without him. Not unusual on paper. Groups split up, people catch rides with other boats, except Nolan never caught that other ride. By the time his friends reached shore, a day that began as a holiday celebration took an unsettling turn. Wells was not with them. Hours passed, no word. Around 11 p.m., his family reported him missing after they received a phone call around 11 p.m. from one of his friends. That's when his mother, Christine Wansley, did what a lot of parents would do at midnight with no answers. She went to Facebook. "We have so many questions. Our hearts are breaking. We keep waiting for Nolan to walk through that door with his beautiful smile and a joke, of course," she wrote. The search that followed pulled in more than just local police. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department, the Department of Marine Resources, the Gulf Islands National Seashore, the U.S. Coast Guard, and the United Cajun Navy all joined the effort. Boats, aircraft, volunteers combing a barrier island most of them had never set foot on. For a full day, nothing. Then, the news everybody feared. Hours later, officials confirmed the worst. A body matching Nolan's description was recovered from the water near the shoreline, according to officials. It happened Monday morning, and here's the first detail that starts to matter later. There were no immediate signs of physical injury. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind told CNN, "No signs of injury, no obvious trauma. On the surface, that reads like a straightforward tragedy. A strong current, a kid who wandered too far from the group. Case closed, essentially, before it even opened. Except the sheriff's office didn't close it. Instead, the coroner's office requested that the autopsy be conducted at the state medical examiner's office because of the condition in which Wells' body was found and to definitively determine whether there was any trauma or foul play. That single decision, sending the body to the state medical examiner instead of just signing off locally, is the first thread. Because almost immediately after, the language coming from law enforcement started colliding with what the family says they were seeing with their own eyes. The sheriff's department told reporters they believed Nolan drowned and didn't suspect foul play. But at the same time, Crump said investigators continue to tell the family that we don't see any evidence of any foul play, even though you have students who recorded an altercation while they were on the boats. An altercation caught on video, while the sheriff's department was telling the family there was nothing to see. That's the collision point. On one side, a coroner saying no obvious injuries, a sheriff saying no foul play suspected. On the other, family members, now represented by civil rights attorney Ben Crump, pointing to footage of people yelling on a boat, a missing phone, and a timeline that, in their words, is not adding up. So the family made a decision. They weren't going to wait on the state's timeline. The family of Nolan Xavier Wells flew his body to Washington for an autopsy as part of an independent investigation, seeking clarity on how he died off the Mississippi coast. Not a Mississippi doctor, not anyone connected to the local system, that had already, in their eyes, moved too fast to call this an accident. And here's where the story stops being just about one missing teenager on one island, and starts being about a second, competing version of the truth, one being built in a lab 3 states away, funded by people who've stepped in because they don't trust the first version at all. That's where we go next. To understand why a family would fly a body across the country, you have to understand what they say they were finding on their own, because it didn't match the calm, procedural language coming out of the sheriff's office. Start with the video. Ben Crump told reporters his team had obtained footage from that day showing what sounded like a confrontation. Crump also referenced a video circulating on social media where Wells appears to scream, asking for his phone. Crump has quoted the audio directly, describing a voice saying, "Give me my frickin' phone. What are you doing?" The legal team believes that voice was Wells. That's not background noise. That's a young man, hours before he disappeared, audibly upset about his phone being taken from him. Then came a pushback from inside the friend group itself. On Good Morning America, a friend named Tracyston Shepard addressed that exact clip. Tracyston Shepard, a friend of Wells, addressed a viral video that investigators have been studying. Many worried the video showed Wells in a confrontation, but Shepard said that was not the case. "That's the video I'm referring to, and that's me yelling," Shepard told Good Morning America. So now you've got two competing readings of the same 10 seconds of audio. Crump's team says it's Nolan yelling for his phone. A friend on national television says no, that's him yelling, not Nolan. Mississippi Today, which reviewed the same footage independently, described it simply as a video taken from a boat that pans to show other boats parked and a sandbar where people stood on and waited nearby. No confirmation either way, just a disputed clip sitting at the center of a case where every detail is being fought over in public. Now the phone itself, this is the part of the story that made even neutral observers pause. According to Crump, Wells' friends took the teen's phone with them when they left Horn Island. Crump said when Wells' family got his phone back, messages had been deleted. Think about that sequence for a second. A young man stays behind on an island. His phone, his only way to call for help, to check in, to be located, leaves with someone else. Crump has said flatly that it's strange for a teenager to be separated from his device at all, especially voluntarily. Crump has said it's bizarre for a teenager to not have his cell phone and noted that Wells' parents managed to find the phone before police did, and they didn't find it through a tip or a search warrant. They found it themselves using consumer tracking software. Wells' mother, Christine Wonesley, tracked his phone using Life 360, according to Crump, a real-time GPS monitoring app developed to enhance family safety. His phone was allegedly found at one of the boys' house who owned the boat, Crump said. A grieving mother tracking down her son's phone with an app before law enforcement ever got there. That detail alone is the kind of thing that makes a family stop trusting the process. And once they had it, they say what wasn't on it was just as troubling as what was. Wells Wonesley said she believes messages were deleted off her son's phone after finding no saved photos or videos on Snapchat from that day. She said that was concerning because it would be unusual for her son not to capture the day on his phone. No pictures, no video, from an 18-year-old at a 4th of July boat party with his friends. If you know anything about how teenagers document their lives today, that absence is loud. Then there's the stayed or left question, and this is where Crump has used the word contradiction more than once. Some witnesses reportedly told investigators Nolan chose to stay behind and find another ride. Others gave a different account entirely. Crump laid it out directly at one point. A young woman he was talking to says that, well, Nolan said he was going back to get on the boat with the boys. The boys say that Nolan told them he was going to stay and talk to the young woman. It's a contradiction, Crump said. Two groups, two completely different stories about who last spoke to Nolan and what he said he was going to do. Somebody's memory is wrong, or somebody's account is convenient. Add to that the timeline of who even called for help. One friend, Warren Cole, phoned the Coast Guard around 11 p.m., the night Nolan went missing. But according to reporting from Fox 10, a friend of Wells made a call to the Coast Guard around 11 p.m. on July 4. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office did not request Coast Guard assistance until around noon the following day. 13 hours between a friend's frantic call and the Sheriff's Office formally requesting search assistance. That's not a detail that made headlines immediately, but it's exactly the kind of gap that erodes confidence in how urgently this case was handled from hour one. Put all of it together. The disputed altercation audio, the missing photos, the deleted messages, the split stories about whether Nolan stayed or planned to leave, the delayed search request, and you start to see why the family's attorney used the word contradictions over and over in interview after interview. Crump summarized it this way at one press conference. Glaring contradictions in the witnesses' accounts of Wells' disappearance, related to whether he stayed on or left the island, why he didn't have his phone with him, and the very idea that a young athlete who knew how to swim would drown. That last point matters more than it might seem. Nolan wasn't a kid unfamiliar with water. He was an athlete in shape, and according to his father, a strong swimmer. He said that his son could swim, and so they're just not accepting that Nolan drowned accidentally, Crump said. That single fact an athletic, capable swimmer disappearing into water with no witnesses and no obvious struggle noticed by anyone around him, is what search and rescue volunteers themselves couldn't fully explain either. Brian Trasher of the United Cajun Navy, who helped coordinate search efforts, raised the same question. Trasher said he hopes an investigation will provide answers about what happened to Wells, focusing on how Wells got into the water, if he struggled or needed help. Trasher wonders how others around Wells wouldn't notice. So by the time the state's own coroner sent the body up the chain for a full medical examiner's autopsy, the family already had a list of things that didn't sit right. The video, the phone, the missing content, the contradicting accounts, the slow search request. None of it, on its own, proves anything happened to Nolan beyond an accident. But together, it's exactly the kind of pile of loose threads that makes people stop accepting the simplest explanation and start demanding a second opinion. That second opinion is what sent Nolan's body 1,000 miles from home. And what came out of that examination, and the fight over even getting it done, is where the next part of the story picks up, all while the state's own process is still running in parallel. The state's autopsy happened first and fast, relatively speaking. Wells' autopsy took place Tuesday at the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office Coast Lab. That's standard procedure for any death where the coroner has flagged questions about trauma. But standard procedure doesn't mean instant answers. An autopsy was performed Tuesday by the state medical examiner, but officials say it could take a couple weeks to receive results, which will include a toxicology report. A couple of weeks. For a family already convinced something wasn't being told to them straight, that timeline felt unbearable. So Crump moved to get an independent examination running on a parallel track, and that required outside help fast. That's where two names most people wouldn't expect to see attached to a Mississippi drowning case suddenly entered the story. Civil rights activist and former football player Colin Kaepernick helped fund the independent autopsy, while filmmaker Tyler Perry will be covering funeral expenses, according to Crump. Kaepernick funding an autopsy, Perry covering a funeral. These aren't incidental details. They're a signal of how far this case had already traveled, beyond Ocean Springs, Mississippi, within just days. A missing teenager's death had become something public figures, with national platforms were choosing to attach themselves to directly with their own money. The reasoning behind flying the body to Washington, instead of using any local Mississippi facility, was explicit. Crump didn't dance around it. The family has commissioned an independent autopsy amid concerns over how a racially charged investigation could be handled in the state of Mississippi, Crump said in an interview with ABC News Wednesday. "This is the state where Emmett Till was lynched," Crump said, adding he feels there are contradictions in several witness statements. That's a heavy comparison to make, and Crump made it deliberately, invoking one of the most notorious unresolved injustices in American history to explain why this family didn't want anyone in Mississippi's system anywhere near the final word on how their son died. The history of Mississippi is something that they don't just read about in books, but it's a lived experience for many Black Americans. That oftentimes when our children are killed in highly questionable situations, that there is this notion that, oh, it was nothing wrong, no foul play, let's just sweep it under the rug. Well, we refused to sweep it under the rug, Crump said, so the body went north to a doctor with, in Crump's words, no connection to Mississippi law enforcement whatsoever. The independent autopsy, which is being paid for by former football player and civil rights activist Colin Kaepernick, will be conducted in Washington, D.C. by a doctor with no ties to Mississippi. The stated goal was total separation from the system the family no longer trusted. But almost as soon as the plan was set, it hit a wall nobody expected. Not politics, not evidence disputes, just ordinary travel chaos. Results from the independent autopsy in Washington, D.C. were expected to be released Friday, but have been delayed due to canceled flights. Flight cancellations, in a case already drowning in frustration. Over slow answers, the independent examination, the one thing the family had control over, got knocked off schedule by something as mundane as air travel. Crump tried to manage expectations publicly, promising updates the moment they had them. Crump said his team will announce those results as soon as they have them. Meanwhile, the sheriff's department pushed back, not on the family's right to a second opinion, but on the flood of theories filling the vacuum left by the delay. Much of the criticism, speculation, and anger on social media this week came after the local sheriff issued a statement saying no foul play was suspected. That may have been a poor choice of words that led to widespread misunderstanding. One law enforcement analyst who reviewed the case for CNN put it plainly. It may have been more accurate for officials to say there were no immediate, obvious signs of foul play rather than the blanket phrase that ended up circulating everywhere. That distinction, no foul play suspected versus no obvious signs of trauma, is not a small one. The first sounds like a conclusion. The second is just an observation, waiting on lab work to either confirm or completely upend it. And that's exactly the gap Christine Wonsley said she and her husband fell into. At a news conference Friday, Wonsley said the sheriff's statements also gave the family pause. "I do absolutely respect law enforcement," she said. "But the accidental drowning thing, it made both me and his father uncomfortable." She kept pushing on that same point in nearly every appearance she made. The accidental drowning thing, it made both me and his father uncomfortable. "Why are we so quick to rush to this? What we're wanting is transparency," she said. Crump said the family requested an independent autopsy be performed because it is not adding up. Even as the delay stretched on, Crump kept framing the wait itself as part of the story. Not a routine hiccup, but confirmation of how badly the family needed a result they could trust completely. "It is not adding up, and that's why the family, at their behest, we had an independent autopsy being performed," Crump said. "We had his body flown from Mississippi to Washington, D.C., because his family wanted to make sure that they had a doctor who had no ties to Mississippi law enforcement to do an independent examination of their son's body. Those results are expected very soon," Crump said. And underneath all of that, the local coroner's office in Mississippi kept working its own case, seemingly unbothered by the parallel track running in D.C. The Jackson County coroner told the Mississippi Free Press the autopsy was conducted July 7, but the state medical examiner hadn't released a final report because she was awaiting a toxicology report. Two labs, two timelines, two sets of eyes on the same body, with two very different sets of incentives. One working through a standard state backlog, the other racing against public pressure and a grieving family's need for certainty. Neither had released a final word yet, and in that silence, the story kept growing, pulling in protesters, lawmakers, and a national conversation about race that had very little to do with toxicology reports and everything to do with history. That's where the next part of this goes, because while the lab stayed quiet, the streets did not. By the second week, this wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It had become something bigger, pulling in elected officials, national advocacy organizations, and crowds of people standing in the Mississippi heat demanding answers. More than 100 people showed up in Ocean Springs itself. More than 100 protesters gathered Saturday to demand answers in the death of Nolan Wells, the Mississippi teen who died under mysterious circumstances after a July 4th boating trip. This is a small coastal town, and 100+ people in the streets is not background noise. It's the community itself saying the official explanation wasn't sitting right with them either. Politicians took notice too. Mississippi's own congressional delegation got involved. Representative Benny Thompson, a Mississippi Democrat, has urged law enforcement to conduct a full, transparent, and timely investigation. When a sitting member of Congress feels the need to publicly push a local sheriff's department toward transparency, that tells you the pressure had moved well past a family's private grief into something closer to a referendum on how the state handles cases like this one. National organizations weighed in with their own statements. The NAACP wrote on Instagram, "Our hearts are with Nolan's family, friends, and community," Jackson County NAACP President Curly Clark told WLOX News. The NAACP is following the investigation closely to ensure no racial discrimination occurs, but he hopes people will not make their own conclusions before the investigation is through. The NAACP is going to ensure that the tragedy will be fully investigated, Clark said. But we do not want anyone to jump to conclusions before the facts are known. That tension, wanting accountability without wanting people to convict anyone in the court of public opinion, ran through nearly every official statement in this case. And it collided directly with what was happening online, where the story had exploded far past anything local law enforcement could control. CNN described the online reaction in stark terms. The photos of Nolan Wells with friends have become something of a Rorschach test for American race relations. In 2026, one photo in particular kept circulating. Nolan, the tallest one in the group, arms slung around his friend's shoulders, smiling for the camera. And there was one detail people kept zeroing in on. In photos from the boat that day, the 18-year-old towers above his friends, his arm casually slung around their shoulders as he smiles for the camera. But he also stands out for another reason. Wells appears to be the only black man among the group, is what turned a drowning investigation into a national flashpoint. Social media commentators soon began comparing Wells' death to the death of Tamla Harsford, a black mother who died in 2018 during an adult sleepover with a group of white women. Though no criminal charges were filed in that case, her family has insisted that the facts of the case indicate that her death wasn't an accident. As authorities concluded in 2021, whether or not the comparison is fair to the specifics of either case, it tells you what people were already primed to believe the moment the sheriff's office used the phrase "no foul play." That single sentence, meant as a procedural update, landed instead like a verdict. And it didn't land well. There were no immediate signs of physical injury, Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind told CNN. But the sheriff's statement to the media that no foul play was suspected seemed to only fuel frustration and anger on social media. The sheriff's department tried to get ahead of the speculation without shutting down the family's demands. Their public messaging repeated the same two things over and over. They weren't done and they needed help. Authorities said they believe Wells drowned and don't suspect foul play, but the sheriff's office stressed Wednesday that investigators are working diligently to determine exactly what occurred. They put out a direct appeal for evidence. The sheriff's office stressed Wednesday that the investigation is ongoing and urged anyone who was on or near the northwest tip of Horn Island to come forward with photos or videos, particularly those depicting alleged altercations or containing images of or believed to include Nolan Wells. The financial support for the family kept climbing right alongside the public attention. A GoFundMe organized for the Wonsleys blew past expectations almost immediately. Wells' family, who posted a GoFundMe that has collected more than $220,000 so far, retained civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who quickly announced that he would be conducting an independent investigation into the young man's death. Not everyone was comfortable with how fast the online narrative moved, even among people directly close to the case. Reporters covering the story noted a wave of unverified theories spreading faster than confirmed facts. One outlet devoted an entire piece to just how much disputed content was circulating without evidence. Rumors about what happened on the boat, who said what, theories about people involved that were never substantiated by investigators or by Crump's own team. Christine Wansley herself, even in the middle of demanding answers, tried to pump the brakes on where some of the public anger was heading. When a small protest broke out among Nolan's own friends in Ocean Springs, she stepped in publicly to ask people to stay peaceful, invoking her son's own personality to make the point. Nolan was not someone who liked fights. He really didn't even like arguments, Wansley said. So don't go out there trying to be tough. That's a mother trying to hold two things at once, demanding the system take her son's death seriously, while asking the public not to turn that demand into chaos in his name. It's a difficult balance, and it's one she kept returning to in nearly every appearance. Not vengeance, just truth. We just want honesty and transparency. We want a thorough investigation, she said. We want that same respect that would be given to anybody else. We just want answers. That single word, answers, is what tied every part of this together. The protesters, the congressmen, the NAACP statement, the GoFundMe, the celebrity funding, everyone attached to this case, no matter their motive or their platform, was ultimately waiting on the same two documents: a state toxicology report and an independent medical examiner's findings from a lab in Washington, D.C. And by the second week, both were still sealed. That's where the story stood as of the most recent reporting. A case suspended between two labs, a family holding its breath, and a nation watching to see which report would speak first. Here's where things stand as of the latest reporting on this case. No final cause of death, no toxicology results, no independent autopsy findings released to the public. Everything that's changed so far isn't a single bombshell finding. It's the slow accumulation of details that keep pulling this case further away. From the tidy phrase the sheriff's office used in the first 48 hours, the state's own timeline reflects that uncertainty. Officials are still awaiting test results, including toxicology, before determining a cause of death. According to Lind, toxicology work, as one law enforcement expert explained to CNN, simply takes time no matter who's asking for it. I've waited as long as 2-3 weeks for toxicology, Ramsey said. That's not a cover-up. That's how labs work. But when a family is desperate for closure and a community is convinced something is being hidden, weeks feel like an eternity. And that same analyst, someone with no stake in either side of this, made a point that's worth sitting with. He said the actual pace of this investigation, medically and procedurally, wasn't unusual at all. What was unusual was everything happening around it. But so far, he said, there is nothing surprising about the timeline of this investigation and how it's proceeding. It's not unusual. What's unusual is the degree of media attention, he said. That's a striking thing to hear, because it doesn't erase a single one of the details that made this case explode. The deleted phone content, the disputed altercation audio, the conflicting witness accounts, the 13-hour gap before a Coast Guard search request went out, the coroner escalating the case to the state medical examiner instead of closing it locally. Every one of those details is real, documented on the record from multiple outlets. They're the reason a family with no connection to celebrity or political power ended up with Colin Kaepernick and Tyler Perry funding their fight for a second opinion, and a sitting congressman publicly pressuring a county sheriff's department. What hasn't happened yet is the final word. No medical examiner, state or independent, has publicly released a determined cause and manner of death as of the most recent reporting. Crump has said his team will announce the Washington findings the moment they're in hand, a promise made and repeated for over a week now, first delayed by canceled flights, and still pending as the family continues to press for what they've called from day one, a ferocious pursuit for the truth. What's undeniable is what this case has already done, regardless of what the final report says. It pulled a small Mississippi coastal community into a national conversation. Neither the sheriff's department nor the Wansley family could have predicted the morning Nolan didn't come home. It put pressure on how law enforcement chooses its words in the earliest hours of a death, because no foul play suspected and no obvious signs of trauma turned out to mean two very different things to two very different audiences. It reopened, for a lot of people watching, a much older question about whose deaths get investigated with urgency and whose get an easy explanation and a quiet close. Christine and Elmore Wansley are still waiting. Their son was supposed to go back to school after that holiday weekend and start training for football season, a detail his father brought up in one interview, almost in passing, the way parents do when they're still adjusting to a future that no longer exists. Wells was supposed to return to school after the holiday weekend to start training for the upcoming football season, his father, Elmore Wansley, said in an interview with Good Morning America. Horn Island is still out there, unchanged, 8 miles off the coast, the tide moving the same way it always has. For everyone who spent a decade going out there for a summer afternoon, it's just a stretch of sand. For the Wansleys, it's the last place their son was seen smiling. Horn Island remains much as it was before, surrounded by water and shaped by the tides. But for Wells's loved ones, that island where the budding football star often spent time represents something new entirely, a search for answers. They are still waiting to understand what happened to Nolan, a son, a teammate, and a friend, whose life stretched far beyond the island where it ended. 2 autopsies, 2 labs, one family refusing to accept a quiet ending until both of them speak. When those final reports do land, whenever that is, they won't just close a case file. They'll answer the question that's been hanging over every press conference, every protest, every statement from every official who's touched this story. Whether what happened to Nolan Wells was exactly what it looked like from the outside, or something the family has insisted from the very first week simply doesn't add up. Nolan Wells' family to do independent autopsy. Attorney describes altercation on boat. ABC News, 134,612,634. Nolan Wells' body was found after a July 4 boat trip. His death has fueled speculation, grief and racial tensions. CNN, a timeline of Nolan Wells' disappearance, death, and the unfolding investigation. CNN, timeline. Here's what we know about the disappearance and death of 18-year-old Nolan Wells. WLOX, independent autopsy planned following Mississippi teenager's death. The Washington Post, family of Nolan Wells to hold press conference with Ben Crump, Rev. Al Sharpton as independent autopsy ordered. Fox 10, what we know about death of Nolan Wells, black teen, who went missing on Mississippi boat trip. PBS News, what happened to Nolan Xavier Wells? Mississippi Today, what we know about Nolan Xavier Wells, the teen found dead in Mississippi. Rolling Stone, 1,235,591,066. Nolan Wells' death. What do we know about the case? News Nation. Nolan Wells' death has sparked scrutiny and speculation. Here's what's happening with the investigation. CNN. New details revealed in press conference with Nolan Wells' family. Ben Crump, Rev. Al Sharpton, WLOX. Protesters demand answers in Nolan Wells' death after July 4th boating trip. NBC News. Independent autopsy results in the Nolan Wells case are expected to be released today. Fox 10. Nolan Wells to have independent autopsy as questions remain around death. Newsweek, https://www.newsweek.com's Nolan Wells independent autopsy